The noise above her head was not what woke her. What pulled her out of sleep was the change in the engine's tone, a faint descending whine that should not have been there while they were flying over the Rocky Mountains. A moment later, the public address system came alive through crackling interference, carrying a voice filled with raw, unfiltered fear. If there are any military pilots on board, please press your call button. Seat 8A was supposed to have been a refuge. Lieutenant Commander Harper Cole rested her forehead against the cold, vibrating plexiglass of the window and tried to let the low hum of the two General Electric engines lull her back to sleep. She was exhausted in a way ordinary rest could not repair. It was not simple tiredness, but a deep fatigue buried in her bones, the kind that drained every reserve of strength after 9 months aboard the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz. During that deployment, she had flown an F/A-18 Super Hornet from a pitching flight deck in total darkness over the Philippine Sea. Her body had officially returned to the United States, and now she was sitting in the premium cabin of a Boeing 767 on a flight from Dallas to Seattle. Her nervous system, however, was still operating on combat time. Every sudden crash of the beverage cart, every sharp cough from a passenger, and every unexpected vibration in the fuselage sent a burst of adrenaline through her spine. All Harper wanted was 4 uninterrupted hours in which absolutely nothing happened. The cabin lights had been dimmed to a muted violet twilight. Most of the window shades were lowered against the high-altitude sun, creating an artificial evening inside the aircraft. To her right, in seat 8B, a middle-aged man wearing a half-zipped sweater attacked the keyboard of his laptop with unnecessary force. He smelled of cheap airport cologne and reheated coffee. Earlier in the flight, he had tried to start a conversation while glancing at the green military gear bag Harper had pushed beneath the seat in front of her. "Are you in the military?" he had asked. Harper gave him a brief closed-mouth smile, nodded once, and put on her noise-canceling headphones. She was in no mood to explain carrier catapult launches to a regional sales manager. She closed her eyes. The aircraft was cruising at 34,000 feet in smooth air. The autopilot was doing the heavy work, following an exact and invisible highway through the sky. Commercial flights had always felt strangely sterile to her. In the Hornet, Harper wore the airplane like a second skin. She felt every knot of airspeed through her spine, every vibration in the stick, and every gravitational force trying to pull blood away from her brain. Flying a fighter jet was an act of continuous, controlled violence. Sitting in a commercial airliner felt more like waiting in a lobby suspended among the clouds. She drifted off with her head against the sidewall. She had no idea how much time had passed when the physics of the airplane woke her. It was not a bump. It was a fall. The 767 dropped sharply. Harper's stomach surged into her throat, and the seat belt dug hard into her waist. The cabin erupted. Someone screamed several rows behind her. The man in seat 8B gasped as his laptop lifted off the tray table and slammed back down. The overhead bins rattled in unison. Plastic panels groaned under the sudden structural stress. Clear air turbulence, Harper's mind calculated instantly. It happened. An aircraft could enter a pocket of descending air or cross a powerful jet stream shear, lose several hundred feet, and then recover when the wings found stable airflow again. But what happened next made Harper's pulse jump. After such a drop, the autopilot might disconnect. If that happened, the pilots had to take control, stabilize the bank angle, and recover firmly but smoothly, ride through the turbulence, level the wings, and raise the nose without overcorrecting. There was nothing smooth about the recovery of this 767. The left wing dropped hard. The uncoordinated roll threw passengers against their armrests. Then the nose pitched too high. The engines roared as they tried to compensate for the sudden loss of airspeed. The airplane began to sway. It felt heavy and clumsy, almost drunk, as if someone were forcing it to walk in a straight line without understanding the weight of its own body. Harper sat upright. Her headphones hung around her neck. She looked through the window. The horizon was tilted by nearly 20 degrees, and the nose was wandering from side to side. "Oh God," the man beside her whispered, gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. "What are they doing up there?" "They're overcorrecting," Harper said quietly, almost to herself. She frowned and studied the front of the cabin. The heavy curtain separating premium economy from first class swung unevenly. After a drop like that, the captain normally would have come over the intercom immediately. "Sorry about that, folks. We hit a patch of turbulence. Flight attendants, please take your seats." But no announcement came. There was only the drone of the engines and the frightened murmur of more than 200 passengers. The airplane returned to something close to level flight, but the stability felt fragile. The rigid precision of the autopilot was gone. The aircraft was being flown manually, and whoever was at the controls was fighting for every second of control. Then a chime sounded. Once. Twice. It was the emergency interphone signal. About 10 seconds later, the speakers came on. The voice that filled the cabin was not the calm baritone of a commercial captain. It was a woman's voice, breathless, shaking, and barely holding back panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the lead flight attendant. We have a medical emergency." There was a pause. The woman inhaled so sharply it sounded like a sob. "If there are any military pilots on board, please press your call button." The cabin went dead silent. The only sound was the rush of air over the fuselage. Harper stared at the blue call button in the panel above her seat. Her chest tightened. "No," she thought. "Absolutely not. I do not drive buses." She was a fighter pilot. She delivered weapons to assigned coordinates and landed on a steel runway moving across the ocean. She knew almost nothing about the handling characteristics of a heavy Boeing, its hydraulic systems, or its glide performance. "Someone else will do it," she told herself. Flights like this always carried a retired airline captain, a cargo pilot, or some Air Force transport aviator. She waited 5 seconds. Then 10. No one stood. No other call light came on. The airplane rolled right again in an ugly, trembling motion. One engine surged late, desperately trying to hold altitude. Whoever was in that cockpit was losing the battle against the aircraft's mass. Harper closed her eyes, let out a long, uneven breath, and raised her hand. She pressed the call button. The small amber light above seat 8A came on like a spotlight. The man beside her stared with his mouth open. "You're a pilot?" There was no trace of his earlier corporate confidence. "Navy," Harper said dryly. She released her seatbelt. "Let me out, Greg." He hurriedly pulled his legs aside so she could pass. Harper stepped into the aisle just as the first-class curtain flew open. A young flight attendant nearly stumbled through it. Her name tag read Chloe. A dark coffee stain spread across part of her skirt. Chloe looked at Harper, then at the illuminated call light. Harper Cole. Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. F/A-18 pilot, Harper said, keeping her voice low. Panic was contagious. Competence was its only antidote. "What is the situation?" Chloe grabbed Harper by the wrist, a clear violation of protocol that revealed how serious things had become, and pulled her quickly through the curtain. First class looked like a mausoleum filled with terrified executives and wide, staring eyes. Harper ignored them. Her mind was already dividing itself into compartments. The civilian passenger disappeared. The officer took her place. They reached the forward galley. Jason, the senior flight attendant, stood beside the reinforced cockpit door. He was an older man whose face had turned the color of ash. He had just hung up the internal phone. "Jason, this is Harper," Chloe said breathlessly. "She's Navy." Jason studied her. Worn jeans. Plain black t-shirt. Messy hair. She did not look like the silver-haired rescuer from a movie. "Commander," he said, pressing his lips together, "we hit severe turbulence and lost a lot of altitude." The flight crew was not strapped in. They were eating. Harper winced. "They hit the ceiling hard," Jason continued. "Captain Miller took the worst impact. He struck the overhead panel and he is unresponsive. First Officer Davis is conscious, but he landed on the center console. His right arm is badly crushed. He is holding the control wheel with his left hand. The autopilot disconnected during the drop, and he is going into shock." A shattered arm and shock at 34,000 feet, Harper thought. Trying to control a nearly 200-ton aircraft with his non-dominant hand. The erratic flying made perfect sense. "Open the door," she ordered. Jason entered the code on the keypad. The heavy armored door unlocked with a metallic snap. The first thing that hit her was the noise. A sharp, repeating alarm filled the space. "Warning! Warning! Warning!" Red and amber lights flashed around the large displays. Then came the smell: metal, cold sweat, and blood. The cockpit was far tighter than Harper had expected. On the left, Captain Miller hung in his restraints. A deep wound across his forehead was spilling bright red blood onto the spotless white collar of his shirt. On the right, First Officer Davis was pale and soaked with sweat. His right arm rested at an impossible angle. His left hand gripped the control wheel with desperate force. He was breathing too fast, his eyes locked on the artificial horizon. "Davis," Harper said as she stepped inside and pulled the door closed. He did not respond. He flinched, jerked the wheel, and sent the airplane rolling left. Harper caught herself on the folding jump seat behind the captain. Then she slapped the glare shield directly in Davis's line of sight. "Davis, look at me." He blinked and tore his eyes away from the screens. His expression was confused and terrified. "I am Lieutenant Commander Harper Cole, United States Navy," she shouted over the alarms. "I am a fighter pilot. I am taking the left seat. I have you." "I can't," Davis gasped. "The trim, I can't reach it." "Yes, you can. Hold it level for 10 seconds. Harper turned toward Jason, who was still standing in the doorway. "Get the captain out. Now." Jason and Chloe moved in. It was a brutal, awkward, desperate process. They had to release the unconscious man from his restraints and drag him backward over the center console. Harper helped lift him and received a warm stripe of blood across her forearm. At last, they pulled him into the galley. Jason closed the door. Harper slid into the captain's seat. Everything felt enormous and unfamiliar. She was used to controlling the F/A-18 with tiny wrist movements on a center stick. Here, she had to move a heavy control wheel with her entire arm. She tightened the 5-point harness until the straps pressed painfully into her body. The pressure anchored her. "All right, Davis," she said, wrapping both hands around the large black horns of the control wheel. "I have the controls." "You have the controls," he repeated. Relief broke through him. He let go, leaned back, and cradled his shattered arm against his ribs. The artificial horizon showed 12 degrees of right bank with the nose 4 degrees high. Airspeed was falling. The aircraft was struggling in the thin air. Aviate. Navigate. Communicate. First, fly. Harper pushed the wheel forward to lower the nose and moved the thrust levers with her right hand. The enormous General Electric engines took nearly a full second to respond. The inertia was astonishing. She had to apply pressure and wait for the airplane's mass to catch up. It was like driving a truck across ice. She corrected left and pressed the rudder pedals. The digital horizon slowly moved back toward center. She held the nose steady and allowed the airspeed to build to a healthy cruise value. Then she reduced power. With her thumb, she worked the trim switch until the heavy pressure on the wheel eased. The controls centered. The airplane stabilized. Harper pressed the yellow master warning button. Silence dropped into the cockpit, broken only by the wind over the nose and Davis's ragged breathing. "Okay," she said. Davis's skin was almost gray. "Stay with me, buddy. We are level." "Where are we?" "Seattle Center," he whispered, closing his eyes. Harper found the frequency selector and the push-to-talk button on the wheel. She checked the reference card on the panel. "Seattle Center, Heavy 442. We are declaring an emergency." There was a burst of static. Then a calm, controlled air traffic controller answered. "Heavy 442, Seattle Center. State the nature of your emergency." "Seattle Center, Heavy 442. Both flight crew members are incapacitated. I am a military pilot with no commercial qualification on this aircraft, and I have taken control. I need immediate vectors to the nearest suitable runway and contact with a Boeing instructor pilot. I need guidance on engaging the autopilot right now." A heavy pause hung over the frequency. "Heavy 442, the controller replied, shifting into the measured rhythm of emergency procedure. Emergency acknowledged. Radar contact confirmed. We are locating a company pilot. What is your experience in the Boeing 767? Harper stared at the wall of screens, rows of switches, an unfamiliar overhead panel. "Zero," she said. "I have never flown one in my life." The radio crackled. "Heavy 442, this is Captain Jim Reynolds with Boeing Flight Standards. I understand we have a naval aviator in the left seat." Reynolds's voice felt like a lifeline. It was older and slightly rough, worn by decades of airport coffee and decisions made under pressure. It did not have the hurried pitch of a frightened passenger. It was the calm voice of a man who had spent his entire life solving problems. Harper pressed the transmit switch. "Affirmative, Captain. Lieutenant Commander Harper Cole. Approximately 2,000 hours in the F/A-18. Exactly 0 in the 767. Understood, Commander. First, let's get the robot flying again. Look at the glare shield directly in front of you. You should see the mode control panel." Harper scanned an overwhelming row of knobs, buttons, and small liquid crystal windows. "I see it. In the center, find a button labeled CMD-A or CMD-B. That is the autopilot. Before you press it, make sure the control wheel is neutral and you are not fighting the trim." Harper checked the artificial horizon. Straight and level. She reached forward and pressed CMD-A. A green light came on. The heavy resistance in the wheel disappeared immediately, replaced by rigid mechanical firmness. The servos took control. The aircraft settled on its current heading and altitude. Harper exhaled hard and took her hands away. Her forearms were burning. The physical relief was immediate, but her heart was still pounding at more than 120 beats per minute. "Autopilot engaged," she reported. "Excellent work, Navy. Now tell me about the first officer." Harper looked right. Davis seemed to have collapsed inward. His skin looked like old parchment, slick with cold sweat. His breathing was rapid and shallow. The shock from the crushed arm was overwhelming his system. "He's fading," Harper said quietly so Davis would not panic further. "He needs a medical team the moment we stop. I am alone as the pilot." "Understood. We are taking you directly to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, runway 16 left. You have 12,000 feet of runway and plenty of room. We are bringing you down to 10,000 feet. Copy. Captain Reynolds, what is the weather in Seattle?" There was a short pause. "Overcast ceiling at 800 feet, visibility 2 miles, light rain. A normal day in Seattle." Harper swore under her breath. 800 feet. That meant she would descend through a thick layer of clouds without seeing anything, depending completely on unfamiliar instruments until she was less than a minute from the ground. In her Hornet, a head-up display projected the flight path directly into her field of view. Here, she would have to look down, interpret instruments she barely knew, and approach the Earth at nearly 200 miles per hour. "Commander," Reynolds said, reading her silence, "normally we would program the flight management system for an automatic approach and landing. But walking you through the computer menus right now would be too risky. You could erase the route or disconnect the autopilot. We are going to do this the old-fashioned way. Air traffic control will give you headings and altitudes. You enter them into the panel, and the aircraft will follow them. When you come out of the clouds, disconnect the autopilot and perform the flare manually. You can do this." "I can do this," Harper said. It was a necessary lie. She had no idea how that enormous machine behaved at low speed. "Good. Look at the panel again. Find the altitude window. Turn the knob down to 10,000. Then press the flight level change button." Harper entered the altitude and pushed the button. The autothrottle immediately pulled the thrust levers back beneath her hand. The roar of the engines faded into a low hum. The nose of the 767 lowered. The descent began. The cockpit door opened behind her. Jason stood in the galley holding a small paper cup of water. His hands were shaking. "Captain Miller is stable, but he still has not regained consciousness," he reported, leaning in just far enough to hand her the cup. "The passengers know something is wrong. The descent feels steep." Harper drank the water in one swallow. Her throat was painfully dry. "Tell them the truth, Jason. Tell them both pilots are incapacitated, but a military pilot is at the controls. Tell them we will land in Seattle in about 20 minutes. Keep everyone seated. Nobody moves." Jason nodded. "Good luck, Commander." He closed the heavy door, sealing Harper inside the sterile center of the crisis. The altimeter unwound quickly. 20,000 feet. 15,000. At 12,000 feet, the blue sky vanished. The 767 entered a dense mass of gray Pacific Northwest cloud. The cockpit darkened at once. Rain began streaming across the windshield. Vertigo crept into the edges of Harper's perception. It was a physiological illusion caused by the absence of a visible horizon. Her inner ear insisted the airplane was turning left, but her eyes, locked on the artificial horizon, showed it was perfectly level. "Trust the instruments," she ordered herself. "Cross-check. Attitude. Airspeed. Altitude. Heading. Heavy 442, Seattle approach," said a new controller. "Turn left heading 190. Descend and maintain 4,000 feet." Harper adjusted the heading selector and altitude knob. The aircraft began a slow turn inside the gray emptiness. She looked at Davis. His eyes were closed, and his chest was barely moving. "Stay with me, Davis," she murmured. She reached over and tapped his uninjured knee. He did not respond. Harper was completely alone. "Heavy 442, you are 5 miles from the outer marker. Reduce speed to 160 knots. Lower the landing gear and select flaps 30. Harper moved the flap lever back. Deep inside the wings, massive hydraulic actuators groaned as large metal surfaces extended into the airflow. She gripped the landing gear lever and pushed it firmly down. A rising roar filled the floor of the cockpit. Several heavy thuds followed. 3 green lights came on in the center panel. Gear down and locked. The drag was enormous. The autothrottle pushed the General Electric engines into a roar as they fought the heavy, wet air. "Commander," Reynolds said through her headset, "you are established on the glide slope. Listen carefully. You are a naval aviator. You were trained to follow a descent path all the way to the carrier deck, almost a controlled impact. If you do that in a 767, you could collapse the main landing gear and tear the engines off the wings. You must flare. You must reduce the descent rate just before touchdown. Understood. Harper's jaw hurt from clenching it. She held the wheel with her left hand and kept her right hand firmly on the thrust levers. The altimeter passed 1,200 feet. Outside the windshield, there was still nothing but gray. "Where is it?" she whispered. 1,000 feet. 900. At about 800 feet, the clouds broke open. The ground appeared all at once, rushing up toward them, wet neighborhoods, dark streets, pine trees, and a highway packed with traffic. Directly in the center of the windshield, framed by flashing approach lights, was runway 16 left. From the cockpit of an F/A-18, a runway that size would have looked enormous. From the height of the 767, it looked like a wet strip of tape. "Runway in sight," Harper transmitted. "Disconnect the autopilot. The airplane is yours, Navy." Harper pressed the switch with her thumb. A loud warning tone sounded to announce that automation was no longer flying. She hit the cancel button. Immediately, the physical weight of the aircraft transferred into her hands. A crosswind struck the fuselage and pushed it right. Harper pressed the left rudder pedal to align the nose with the runway centerline and lowered the right wing slightly into the wind. It was like wrestling a whale. The muscles in her arms tightened against the slow, delayed response of the heavy controls. 500, announced the automated ground proximity voice. "A little high," Harper muttered. She reduced power slightly. 400. The huge white runway numbers rushed toward them. Rain covered the glass. The windshield wipers hammered back and forth in a frantic rhythm. 300. Harper's eyes moved constantly between the airspeed indicator and the concrete. 145 knots. Perfect. 200. They were over the pavement. The runway edge lights blurred into glowing lines. 100. 50. 40. "Flare, Navy. Flare now." Reynolds shouted over the radio. Harper fought every instinct drilled into her muscles over years of carrier landings. She did not hold the nose down. She did not let the airplane strike the runway like a fighter hitting a carrier deck. Instead, she pulled the heavy control wheel toward her chest with enormous force while bringing the thrust levers fully back. 30. 20. 10. The 767 floated. For what felt like an eternity, it hung above the runway while consuming hundreds of feet of pavement. Then the main landing gear found the concrete. The impact was hard enough to rattle teeth. A shock wave traveled up Harper's spine. The airplane bounced once in a terrifying secondary movement before its full weight finally settled and the landing gear struts compressed. Harper pushed the wheel forward to place the nose gear firmly on the runway. "Spoilers up," she said to herself. She pulled the speed brake lever. Panels on top of the wings snapped upward, destroying the remaining lift. Then she grabbed the reverse thrust levers and pulled them up and back. The engines howled in protest, redirecting thousands of pounds of thrust forward. The deceleration was violent. The harness threw Harper into the seat. She pressed hard on the brake pedals. The heavy aircraft shuddered across the wet concrete while the anti-skid system pulsed beneath her boots. 100 knots. 80. 60. At 30 knots, she returned the reverse thrust to idle. The roar stopped. Only the rhythmic thumping of the wheels over the centerline lights remained. Harper guided the aircraft onto a high-speed taxiway and brought the enormous machine to a complete stop. She raised the parking brake lever. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Only the cooling fans and the heavy rain against the windshield could be heard. Harper released the control wheel. Her hands remained curled like claws. The muscles in her forearms twitched uncontrollably. She could not stop shaking. It was not fear. It was the massive flood of adrenaline draining from her system, leaving only hollow exhaustion behind. Heavy 442, the tower controller said in an unusually gentle voice, fire and rescue vehicles are approaching from your right side. Welcome to Seattle, Commander. Harper pressed the transmit button. Her thumb shook so badly she nearly missed it. Copy, Seattle. Send the medics immediately. My first officer is fading. She released the 5-point harness and turned toward Davis. He was completely unconscious, his head hanging to one side. The cockpit door opened. Jason stood there, tears running freely down his ash-gray face. Behind him, the chaotic sound of more than 200 passengers cheering, crying, and applauding flooded into the forward galley. Open the main cabin door, Jason, Harper said. Her own voice sounded impossibly distant. Minutes later, paramedics filled the cramped cockpit. They moved with trained, almost brutal efficiency. They stabilized Davis's neck and pulled him from the right seat. Another team was already working on Captain Miller in the galley. Harper pressed herself against the rear bulkhead to stay out of the way. She watched the blur of fluorescent yellow jackets, medical bags, and rapid commands. An older female paramedic with a radio clipped to her chest stopped in front of Harper. The woman looked at the worn jeans, the blood smeared across the black t-shirt, and the obvious absence of an airline uniform. You landed this thing? She asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Harper looked through the windshield. The concrete was covered in rain. Red and blue emergency lights flashed around the aircraft, painting the cockpit in shifting color. She thought of her F/A-18, probably waiting at an air station hundreds of miles away, small, lethal, and perfectly understandable. She managed a tight, exhausted smile. Greg, the man in seat 8B, had a connecting flight to catch. She picked up her green military bag, slung it over her aching shoulder, and walked out of the cockpit. Landing a commercial aircraft weighing nearly 200 tons, descending through clouds with almost no visibility and without ever having flown that model, sounded worse than a nightmare. But Commander Harper Cole proved that training, discipline, and ice-cold composure could overcome even the impossible. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, leave a like and share it with someone who enjoys high-stakes aviation drama. What would you have done if that call light had illuminated above your seat? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe for more realistic, intense stories that will make your pulse race every week.